Hi, welcome back to the Self-Care Summit. I'm here with Dr. Fleet Maull, renowned meditation teacher, executive coach, social entrepreneur, and leading innovator in the mainstream mindfulness movement. Dr. Maull is the founder of Prison Mindfulness Institute, the Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety, National Prison Hospice Association, Heart Mind Institute, and the Global Resilience Summit. He is also the co-founder of this self-care summit, the Best Year of Your Life Summit, Summitpalooza, the Engaged Mindfulness Institute, Rwanda Bearing Witness Retreat. He is the author of 3 books, including Radical Responsibility, How to Move Beyond Blame, Fearlessly Live Your Highest Purpose, and Become an Unstoppable Force for Good. Dr. Maull leads meditation retreats, breathwork and personal evolution workshops, leadership seminars, and prison and first responder training programs. Welcome, Fleet. It's great to be with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be here with you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. So today we're focusing on physical self-care, and we're happy to have you here to talk about breath work. So let's start off first with your definition of self-care, what it is and why it's so important.
Well, first of all, I'm just really excited to launch this summit, right? We're on day 1 and we're focusing where it makes sense to begin with our own bodies. But for me, self-care is really about living smart. Unfortunately, in our culture, sometimes self-care can be associated with the idea of being selfish, or we don't give ourselves permission for self-care, or it could be seemingly self-indulgent or something, or we might think it's a luxury, but actually it's a complete necessity. And it's really just about living smart. I mean, we all know that, the things that we use, like our automobiles or a bicycle or other pieces of equipment we use, if we don't take care of them, they break down, right? Yep. And so we wouldn't think it was selfish to, change the oil in the car or get it, in for regular maintenance to wherever we take it and so forth. So it's really similar with ourselves. It's just living smart. We're challenged in so many ways, and I think we're challenged more so than we've ever been before. And so we really need to focus on self-care. And, for me, it's about doing the appropriate things to replenish our energy physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, so that we can show up in our lives as our best selves and just continue to progress and evolve in our lives in ways that we don't get ourselves over depleted or cause injury to ourselves. So that's kind of what self-care means for me. It's just really living smart, working smart, doing what I need to do to sustain my life so I can live a life of meaning and purpose with my family and friends and community and enjoy my life.
Yeah. And I so appreciate what you're doing for the Self-Care Summit, because somewhere along the way, we have gotten away from self-care, and we think that it is almost selfish that we are doing this when, like you said, it is a necessity. And now here we are giving permission to people to say, no, you need self-care to live not only your best life, but to have those great relationships. And when you look at it that way, people are like, oh, yes, I do need to take care of myself so they can have those things that you mentioned. So thank you. So can you explain what are some of the key dimensions of physical self-care?
Well, some of it's quite obvious, but for me, the most foundational one is actually getting enough rest. And I really try to make sure I get my full 8 hours sleep. I can get away with 7, but I feel better when I get 8, and sometimes it's 7.5. But getting a good night's rest is so critically important. And I've learned more about this from some of the Ayurvedic physicians I've worked with and breathwork teachers I've studied with and so forth, that when we're asleep at night is when the body replenishes itself. Our body has tremendous capacities for self-healing. Well, I was trying to think of John Douillard, who's been on many of our summits, an amazing Ayurvedic physician. So it's at nighttime that, it's like our own internal organic medical system. And it works on the night shift. That's when it does its work, right? And if we don't get enough sleep, we're shortchanging our body's ability to do the self-healing work that it does. Literally, our brain kind of sloughs off, the toxic buildups. It used to be with computers, you had to every now and then use, some utility to defragment your computer. Now they kind of do that automatically. I think most of them do, but so, it's like, all those broken files and circuits you need to kind of or it builds up and then your computer doesn't work anymore. So our brain does the same thing, but our whole body releases toxins and heals itself on so many different levels while we're asleep. So I think sleep is foundational. Obviously, good nutrition is really important, what we put into the body. And I think, people have different needs. And even in the Ayurvedic system, some people need more protein than others. And it does make some sense, for some people to be to use animal protein as part of their diet. Or they might not anyway, even though an Ayurvedic physician might say they have the body type where it's good, but maybe for other reasons they don't. But at any reason, any shift any of us can make toward a plant-based diet, to more whole foods, which means the kind that don't come in packages or haven't been processed, and a plant-based diet, and growing our own food where we can, even if we're growing a few things on our windowsill. My wife and I just started putting in the garden this weekend, and we eat out of our garden all summer long. And we're very fortunate to live in an area where we can just bicycle a few blocks away or walk a few blocks away or we pick up our farm share once a week, because we live in a little village that's surrounded by farms. And so feel very privileged in that way. And I know some people live in areas where they're challenged to get access to really good food. Yeah. However, people in the middle of New York City are starting gardens on rooftops and windowsills, and, so plant-based diet, getting enough hydration, drinking enough water. Most of us don't drink enough water.
Yep. Cheers to you.
Breathing, thank you. And breathing properly, which we're going to talk about quite a bit today. So there's a lot of these different dimensions of self-care, but another really important one that I've become more aware of, and in part due to guidance from, again, John Douillard, the Ayurvedic physician I mentioned, but also a book I've been reading on, it's called Luminous Life. I highly recommend it. It's written by an incredible optometrist, Jacob Lieberman, I believe, who, as an optometrist, discovered the deep, profound nature of light. And he's basically become not only an optometrist, but a spiritual teacher, and how important it is for our circadian rhythms to expose ourselves to that early morning sunlight. And, just to get that cycle, our circadian rhythm circle, and then beginning to lower the lights towards the end of the day and preparing ourselves to get a good night's sleep. That there's a natural cycle to be part of. And because we modern humans have been able to kind of insulate ourselves from the elements, and with electricity, we can decide, I can be up and sleep whenever I want to. Well, that's all well and good. And we'll probably all go through times in our life when we do that. But in the long run, it's actually not so healthy for us. And actually, we know scientifically, there's a lot of negative health impacts associated with shift work, and especially people working the night shift. Yeah. So exposure to light, and we all know we need to get vitamin D through sunlight, but that healthy exposure to light and getting in line with our circadian rhythm. So there's a lot of different dimensions to having this most complex system in the known universe, the human body and nervous system and brain, functioning at its optimal best. And so I've covered a few of them there.
Yeah. I love everything that you said. And sometimes I feel like we as humans are always trying to look for the latest and greatest method, when sometimes it's just simple, when you got to go back to the basics of, like you just said, the key dimensions of optimal physical self-care, getting enough sleep, getting the light. That seems pretty simple, but sometimes we just like to overcomplicate things.
Well, one real simple thing, and I was just doing an interview for the summit, which is on day 4, with a wonderful energy worker, Oliver Nino. And we were talking about one simple strategy for self-care can be getting closer to the elements, right? Earth, wind, fire, water, spiritual energy. So we modern humans, again, we're born into a world of disconnection, and we've become so disconnected from the natural world. So getting closer to the natural world, actually sitting on the earth, spending time outside, sitting on the earth is really healthy, and will realign our energy. When we take a bath or a shower, we could really take time to feel the water on our skin and have a sense that we're purifying the body, and being near water, being in water. We all know the negative ions that are associated with thunderstorms and rainstorms, and how that realigns our energy, replenishing. again, getting out and getting that healthy sunlight, exposure to the wind, to the air, right? So just in a real simple thing, any way in which we can kind of get closer to the elements is going to be good for us. And a lot of studies have been done around the world with people who live to be centenarians. Most of them live lives very close to nature.
Yeah. I love that. I love that advice. Go out and be in nature. That's one of the best things for me because I love it, whether it's in the mountains or it's by the ocean I just love that. So thank you. So you have practiced meditation and breath work for over 5 decades, and you have worked with people from all walks of life around the world, helping them establish meditation and breath work practices. So what is breath work and what is its relationship to meditation?
Well, breath work is basically consciously working with our breath in some intentional way. And in meditation, basic mind training, mindfulness training, meditation, there are many, many, many types of meditation. But the foundational training generally has to do with stabilizing our attention and our awareness, right? Being able to be present. And so we generally train our attentiveness and our mindfulness and our awareness with an anchor of some kind, an object of mindfulness. And the most common one is the breath and the body. You can use many, many different things as an anchor. You can work with all the sense perceptions, but it's very common that we work with the breath and the body. So sitting still and just feeling the breath and feeling the body. And we notice the mind wanders off, we gently bring it back. We don't beat ourselves up. The mind wanders, that's what it does. It's completely counterproductive to beat ourselves up about anything. We just come back. And every time we come back, we're training the mind to recognize when it departs into distraction and then bring itself back to the present moment. And the breath is happening in the moment, right? The breath, we don't have to make ourselves breathe. We don't have to tell ourselves to breathe. It's an autonomic nervous system process. It'll just go. We can just allow ourselves to breathe. And with meditation, generally, we're not manipulating the breath in any way. We're just letting the breath be as it is, just letting it have its own natural rhythm. But by focusing our attention on it and really joining with it, it's a wonderful anchor to become more grounded, more centered within the body and the breath, and to synchronize body and mind, which is healthy for us on so many, many levels, and can really be the portal into profound pathways of spiritual development and awakening and consciousness and so forth. So that's kind of the relationship of the breath to meditation. And in breath work, very often we are sort of consciously manipulating the breath in some way. And why would we do that? Well, we do that because the breath is completely aligned with our autonomic nervous system. And it's called autonomic because it operates almost all the processes of this most complex system in the known universe, the human body, automatically without us having to tell it to do so, right? And the autonomic nervous system has these 2 branches. And very simply, one upregulates, which gives us alertness, and then goes beyond that into stress and beyond that into fight or flight. And the other branch is more the relaxation, which relaxes and takes us into rest and restoration. And there's an appropriate balance for those 2 branches for any human activity we might be involved in, whether responding to a crisis or kind of being in a state of readiness where we need to be, or just performing normal work activities or household activities, or wanting to relax with family or enjoy a social occasion, or preparing to have a good night's sleep, right? Where obviously we want a lot more parasympathetic, not so much sympathetic. If we have too much sympathetic, the mind starts cranking away. We can't go to sleep. We've all had that experience, right? Yeah. So it's an appropriate balance. Well, the amazing thing is, the wonderful thing is that balance is completely connected with the breath. When we breathe in, there's a slight sympathetic branch activation. In other words, a slight upregulation. When we breathe out, slight downregulation, activation of the parasympathetic branch, which is why when we breathe in, the heart rate accelerates a little bit. And when we breathe out, the heart rate decelerates a little bit. So a normal, healthy heart rhythm is not just bump, bump, bump. It's actually bump, 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 called heart rate variability because of that natural flow. So, but if we have too much in-breath and a shallow breath, often we lose that heart rate variability, and that's a marker of a poor stress response. So a lot of athletes these days wear heart monitors of some kind, and they're tracking as part of their conditioning routines, their heart rate variability is one marker of their conditioning, right? And so, but the key here is that the in-breath upregulates, the out-breath downregulates, and therefore, by using different types of breathwork practices that involve extending the in-breath or extending the out-breath or the balance between the two, we can adjust our own physiological state. And by adjusting our physiological state, we're also able to self-regulate our emotions, our behaviors, and really be more in a self-leadership position in our life, more in the driver's seat of our own life, because we've learned to self-regulate. So that's kind of the basics of breath work and breath practice. Apart from the fact that there's all, besides the ability to self-regulate and be more in that leadership position in one's own life, there's many, many, many health benefits associated with proper breathing.
I just learned so much in those 2 minutes. You explain it so well. I never knew the in and out and like what that does. So thank you for explaining that to me. That makes a lot of sense. So how might a breathwork practice support overall leverage for our physical self-care?
Mm-hmm. Well, think about it. What do we most need, even at the cellular level, for ourselves to thrive and thus our body to thrive, and for ourselves to thrive in our life? We need H2O, we need water. Yep. We need some kind of nutrition. At the cellular level, it's glucose, right? That comes from our food. And then we need oxygen. Those are the three things that we most need. Now, you could say, and in this book I mentioned, Luminous Life, that I'm reading, you could say what we most need is light, because actually all three of those things are composed of light at the ultimate, most basic, most fundamental level. Not that we really actually know what light is, but we know light exists, and we know it is this most fundamental form of energy. So in some ways, the food that we eat, from which we get our nutrition, the glucose, the water we drink, and the air we breathe, actually at its most fundamental is light energy, right? So you could say what we most need is light, but these are three avenues by which we get it. Again, I mentioned the importance of getting out in sunlight, because that's an adjunct to that, right? Yep. So, but anyway, breathing properly is so important. And most of us, as I said before, do not drink enough water. We've all heard that you're supposed to drink so many fluid ounces per your body weight. Can be a little more for men, a little less for women. Sometimes really depends on the individual. Sometimes we talk about 8 of these glasses is enough for a lot of people. But most of us do not drink enough. And so we're kind of starving ourselves at the cellular level in terms of water.
Yeah. And you're being intentional about it.
I am. And then I drink a lot of water. Yeah. And and then the other thing is most of us don't breathe properly. And so we're not getting enough oxygen. So many of us have been conditioned to shallow breathing, which is a stress response. When we get stressed, that's where we get the kind of unintentional, unconscious stress response. A lot of sympathetic activation, very little parasympathetic, right? The fight or flight, the stress response. And in modern life, we're all kind of triggered into some level of stress most of the time, right? Yep. Unless we proactively manage that in some way. So with that stress response, we tend to go to shallow chest breathing. Like that. We're kind of gasping for air, trying to quickly get oxygen. And we're using these muscles up here to breathe with our chest. And what that does, it creates shallow breathing, and the breath, the air doesn't go, and the air and the oxygen that it contains, as well as the other gases, doesn't really go very far into the lungs. And why is that important? Well, the important thing about breathing is the blood oxygen exchange, right? So the blood cells are returning from our whole body, right? And releasing carbon dioxide, which we then breathe out. And then they're receiving oxygen that we breathed in, right? And then they take that throughout the body to every cell in the body, right? So we want that blood oxygen exchange, or that overall blood and gas exchange with oxygen and carbon dioxide, to happen effectively. For that to happen, the breath needs to go into the lungs deeply and spend enough time there, because where that exchange happens is what are called the alveoli. Right, you have the bronchi, and then at the very ends, if you ever seen pictures of the lung, it has this fibrous framework, right? And at the end of all these fibers are what are called the alveoli, and that's where the blood oxygen or blood gas exchange happens. And most of those, or the largest number of those, are deep in the lungs. So if we're just breathing shallowly most of the time, we're not getting the air where it needs to go to receive to release the carbon dioxide effectively and to receive the oxygen that we need. So shallow breathing is not healthy for us. So the way we're meant to breathe is diaphragmatically, where instead of breathing with the chest using these muscles, the breath is driven by the diaphragm. And I want to just give an example of that if I can. I'm going to stand up here for a moment and let people see my fat belly here. So when we breathe in, if we're breathing with the diaphragm, the belly's going to come out like that. That's in-breath because the diaphragm muscle is pushing down, right? Because it's contracting, which creates a vacuum in the lungs and draws the air in, right? And since when the diaphragm muscle, which is right below the lungs and above the rest of our organs in the abdominal cavity, when that pushes down, the organs have nowhere to go but out. So that pushes the belly out. So we call it belly breathing, and it's a good visualization. You have the idea of breathing into the belly. But what's really happening is the diaphragm muscle is contracting, pushing down. So all of our major organs are kind of pushing out, extending the belly. And then when we exhale, we breathe it where the belly comes in. So if anybody just does that a few times, really constantly breathe with the belly. Like on the in-breath, belly goes out. In-breath, in. You'll feel your diaphragm muscle. You get to know your diaphragm muscle. Now, if you really pull the belly in on the out-breath to expel all the air, right, you're also using your abdominal muscles a bit. But the main driver is the diaphragm muscle. So that's why proper breathing is called diaphragmatic breathing. Now, we're also there are some muscles between the ribs called the intercostal muscles. They help the rib cage open, allow the lungs to fill with air, release the air. But again, the diaphragm muscle, which is this big, flat, kind of cone-like muscle right below the lungs, between the lungs and all of our internal organs, that's meant to be the main driver. Now, you can see this really easily. Any of us who have dogs or cats at home, you see your pet laying on the living room rug or on the couch where they're not supposed to be probably and having their nap, right? And how are they breathing? You'll see that belly going in and out. Just nice belly breathing. Any of us who've had small children or an infant in their crib or their cradle, how are they breathing? Belly breathing, belly going in and out. That's our natural way of breathing. And we've learned to breathe with the chest. It's a stress response. It's a learned response. The good news is we can unlearn it relatively easily. I'll give you a little strategy for that right now. But it's important also to know that we have neural networks. Everything we do is supported by neural networks. Every behavior we have, all the learning we have, being able to tie our shoes, being able to speak, being able to ride a bicycle, everything we do is represented by neural networks in the brain. So we have a neural network, a strong neural network for diaphragmatic breathing. Now, we may have developed a neural network for chest breathing, and it became a habitual stress response, right? But because that pre-existing strong neural network is there for diaphragmatic breathing, we can default back to that with just a little work, right? So one way to do that worked for me when I was quite young and realized I'd become a chest breather, and fortunately was introduced to this in my late 20s, and I was able to make that shift. And I've been a default belly breather ever since, was laying in bed at night, ready to go to sleep, placing one hand on the chest, one hand on the belly, and, like you're laying in bed, and then just adjusting the pelvis, the body until it's usually how you're holding your pelvis, and until you notice that this hand is staying relatively still, and the one on the belly is going up and down a little bit. So you're in belly breathing. And then just do that, maybe counting the breaths or whatever until you fall asleep. If you do that as a short little practice before you go to sleep every night, within weeks or at the most several months, your previous neural networks for default mode belly breathing will kick back in and you'll convert yourself to being a belly breather. It's also helpful just to have that awareness during the day that if, especially if you're feeling stressed, notice where you're breathing from. Oh, yeah, I'm breathing with my chest. Okay, relax back into the belly. There's another thing that anybody can see really quickly. If you take your hands, if everybody in the audience will just take their hands and put them behind their head like that for a moment, maybe lean back in a chair and don't fall over, but back. And then just let yourself relax, let your belly relax, and just notice how you're breathing. Pretty soon you're going to be breathing with the belly. You can't help it because the muscles that you need for chest breathing are right here, and putting your hands like this disengages them. So your body has to default back to diaphragmatic breathing. right? You could also do that if you're up, alongside a wall. You could just put your hand up along the wall, leaning against the wall like that. Anything like that's going to disengage these muscles, right? So during the day, we can just, have that awareness. So I'm feeling a little stressed out. So how am I breathing? Oh, yeah. Relax back into belly breathing. And we can retrain ourselves so that we become default diaphragmatic breathers. And just that one thing can radically improve our health.
Yeah. Wow. That was amazing. So a follow-up question to that, because I know so many of us are sitting at our desks these days, like I am now, and I'm going to be here for many, many hours after this. Does it have to be long breaths through your belly, or what would it look? Because that's where I think I would have the issue of like, remember intentionally if I'm just like in for 2 seconds and out for 2 seconds. So what would that look like?
Yeah. Well, we'll get into some actual breath work
Perfect.
practices in a moment, right? And we'll go into that. But no, it doesn't have to be any particular length. In fact, when we're just living and working, we should just let our breath be as it is. The important thing is that it's diaphragmatic, right? And sometimes it may be deeper, sometimes it may be more shallow. We don't need to worry about that at all. Just let it be diaphragmatic. Now, I will say it is helpful to slow the breath down, and most of us breathe too quickly and too shallowly. So we'll talk about that. But the way that works is by doing intentional breathwork practices, then over time, our default breathing will slow down.
Okay.
So it's not like I'm going to have to pay attention to my breath 24/7. No, It's not like that at all. But by doing intentional practices, we can, one, make the shift from chest breathing to default diaphragmatic breathing. And two, over time, our natural default breathing will slow down, right? But we can do that by doing intentional breathwork practices. But most of the time when we're just living and working, we just let the breath be as it is, just like we do in meditation. We just let the breath find its own rhythm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. So that kind of goes into our next question, that for maybe people like me or people that are watching, it can feel overwhelming when they are so busy with family, friends, work to consider taking on a new practice and disciplines. So what do you recommend people do to get started with breathwork practices?
Well, I want to give you a little practice here. Sometimes today we talk about micro practices, right? Because we're all so busy. So what are these little micro practices that we can do anytime, anywhere throughout the day? Now, the thing is, if you have a formal practice, whether it's a formal sitting meditation practice, formal breathwork practice, yoga practice that you do every day, then you're going to be more likely to remember to do these micro practices throughout the day. But nonetheless, it's great to have a broad palette of these micro practices. And then we can just, really integrate them into the way we live our lives. So here's one of those micro practices, very simple for anybody to learn to do. It's called straw breathing. Now, it's called straw breathing because you can do it with a straw. You can take a full straw or cut it in half, have a half straw. And when you breathe in through the nose with the mouth closed. And when you breathe out through the straw. So you put the straw in your lips, breathe out. Now, it's a little harder to breathe through a straw than just to breathe out normally. And that has some physiological impacts, strengthens the diaphragm muscle, does a number of things. But you could also do this without the straw. And I think most people, most of the time, do it without the straw. So we do it by just pursing our lips on the out breath, as if we're blowing out through a straw, or kind of like we're whistling. Sure. So we breathe in through the nose, out through pursed lips, in through the nose, out through pursed lips. So I encourage our audience to all try that right now. Just set up that breathing pattern, breathing in through the nose with the mouth closed, and breathing out through pursed lips. Is it breathing through a straw, or somewhat like whistling? And you can let it aspirate a little bit so you can hear it. You don't have to, but you can do that kind of you want, but it can be silent as well. So breathing in through the nose, out through pursed lips. So just get that breathing pattern set up, stay with that. And once we get that established, then we're going to begin counting. And we're going to count, which will help us stay on track. But the idea is to extend the out breath twice as long as the in breath. So to begin with, I'll guide us. We're going to do a 4 count in and an 8 count out, right? So let's all do a little exhale. And then we can begin together on an inhale. So exhale and in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In through the nose, 2, 3, 4. Out through pursed lips, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So just stay with it. Yeah, I think I'm sure you have the idea by now. We use the counting to stay on track, and the out breath or exhale is twice as long as the inhale. So just stay with that. Maybe close the eyes for a moment. And let's just do that in silence for even 30 seconds now. Just keep going for about 30 seconds. In through the nose, out through pursed lips. I would imagine you, Melissa, and most of our audience feel themselves calming down a little bit, feel your nervous system down regulating, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
like magic. It really works. And we can do it anytime, anywhere. Before the pandemic hit, I was a road warrior with, 2 or 3 times a week to the airport and a lot of white knuckle drives in bad weather. And I'm doing straw breathing the whole time I'm driving. And I avoid the road rage and I stay well regulated, get to the airport, get through security, get to the gate, usually make my flight and stay in a relatively calm, well regulated state because I'm doing straw breathing the whole way and it keeps my body well regulated. That's anybody can look that up in your browser and learn all about it. Straw breathing is very simple to do. Anybody can learn it. And it directly engages the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. It shifts us from an overactivated sympathetic response to moving into that relaxation response, rest and recovery response, right? So that's just one simple technique. There's many, but that's a simple one that anyone can learn and begin to integrate into their life a little bit.
I love that. I need to start integrating that one in my life for some self-regulation. Definitely. So, are there any instances that breath work can be dangerous, and does one need to take precautions?
Well, with any kind of body mind practices like this, any sense of ambition is counterproductive. So, there are people that work out and want to do high performance work, and that's fine with good coaching, right? And good training, right? But anytime we're really going to be pushing ourselves, we need really good trainers, really good coaches, so we know exactly what we're doing. But in general, for self-care, the approach is always gentleness. And as long as you remain gentle with breath work, you're not going to have to worry about anything. And especially simple practices like the straw breathing. In a moment, we'll talk about something called box breathing and some of these other simple techniques. We really don't have to worry about that. There are some advanced breathing techniques that could get us into a bit of a dysregulated state. But one thing you can do, if you ever feel yourself kind of feeling dysregulated or lightheaded, just stop and just let your breath return to its normal breathing pattern. But the real key here is gentleness. And if you're going further, if you want to get more sophisticated, really go into a deep breath work practice, then make sure you get really good teaching, that you have a teacher, trainer that you're working with, and you're really educating yourself. So like anything, you know what you're doing, right? There's one more thing I'd like to say about this diaphragmatic breathing. So sometimes we talk about the difference between chest breathing, shallow chest breathing, and just diaphragmatic or belly breathing, right? Sometimes we talk about the difference between vertical breathing and horizontal or lateral breathing. So breathing with the chest is kind of vertical breathing, like that, right? And when we breathe diaphragmatically, it's not just a matter of extending out the belly, but it's also about filling up the whole chest cavity, rib cage, right? Yeah. So maybe I'll stand up again for a moment. I hope people can see me all right here.
Yep,
right?
Perfect.
So on the in-breath, we are filling up that belly, right? We fill up the belly, breathe deep into the body, right? But then we keep breathing in. We take the breath up through the abdominal area, and then we fill up the chest cavity. and it's filling up not just in front, but in the sides and in the back. So some people, you feel an expansion all around the belt line, right?
Yep.
And then, so a full deep body breath is first you fill up the belly, then you bring the breath up, the whole chest, all the way you feel the collarbone rise, and then on the release, the collarbone drops, and you just let the breath flow back out, right? So that's a full body breath, right? And also another way to do it is to put your hands kind of, right here on the side of your rib cage, and then breathe so you feel your hands going in and out, right? All right. I think maybe if I even get closer to the camera, people can kind of see that. You see my hands?
Yeah.
So that's full body breathing. Now, of course, we're not going to walk around breathing that fully, right? Again, we can the more we do breath training, breath work, the more it will change our default breathing to be slower, fuller, and healthier. But again, in our regular daily activities, we can just let the breath be the breath. But when we're doing that full body breathing, it's the belly, but then also filling up the whole rib cage, front, back, and sides, right? So that's, again, it's important to have that idea. So we can have the idea, am I breathing vertically, or am I breathing more like a bellows, right? Like a bellow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one other thing to keep in mind about our breath. One more thing I'll say about our regular breathing. Well, two more things I'll say about it. It's said from the literature, if you really read about breath work, and I really recommend the wonderful new book, maybe it's a year or two old now, by James Nestor called Breath. I think it's just called Breath. And he spent like 10 years using himself as a guinea pig and studying all kinds of breath work, East and West, the stuff coming from the yogic traditions of India and other places, as well as from the martial arts, and also coming out of modern science and various scientific disciplines in the West, in Europe, and in the US over the last 300 years. All kinds of people have done. In fact, amazingly, scientists and doctors have studied breath work, cured all kinds of illnesses, been called heretics for doing so. And then finally it gains acceptance because the evidence is so powerful. And then they die, and then it goes underground again for 50 to 75 years, and then it resurfaces again. And that's been going on for the last 400 or 500 years in the West. And fortunately, we're in the resurgence period now where there's a renaissance of interest. But at any rate, James Nestor studied all of this using himself as a guinea pig, traveled all around the world, working with different systems of breath work, and wrote this amazing book called Breath. It's a tour de force. So I really recommend that book. Yeah. So it's said from most of the science around breath that the ideal breath rate is about 5.5 seconds in and 5.5 seconds out. Now, most of us breathe more quickly than that. If you think about that, it's like 1,001, 1,002, 1,003, 1,004, 1,005 and a half, 1,001, 1,002. That's slower than most of us breathe, right? Yeah. So we can do breath work exercise where we slow it down much more than that even. And by doing those, that's going to influence the way we normally breathe. And ideally, if we can get to that place where our default way of breathing is slower like that, it's going to be healthy for us on many, many levels. And people can do their own research around this. It's about getting a better blood oxygen exchange, but there's many, many different ways in which breathing properly is healthy for our whole body-mind system. So, so that's one thing. What is the ideal kind of pace, right? And we don't have to worry about I'm not breathing too bad. There's no point in getting self-conscious about this. It's just knowing if we begin to engage with some breath work, learn to shift from chest breathing to diaphragmatic breathing, over time we'll slow our breath down and it'll be healthy for us. Now, the other thing is breathing through the nose. Many people, for many reasons, mostly because of stress, become mouth breathers. And even during the day, they're breathing a lot with the mouth, or especially breathing at night, they're breathing with the mouth. And this is associated with snoring. It's associated with, now I've lost the word. The reason that people have these CPAP machines and
sleep apnea.
Sleep apnea, right. This is all associated with mouth breathing. And there's reasons we do it. Again, you read in James Nestor's book, there's things that have happened to us modern humans over the last 300 or 400 years in terms of our diet that's actually changed our facial structure and given us less robust nasal pathways and tended to force in a differently structured jaw. And it is all led in the direction of becoming mouth breathers instead of nose breathers. And we're designed to breathe through the nose. The nose is the nasal passage, the sinuses, the nose is an amazingly complex system that's designed to filter the air before it goes into the body. And so there's all kinds of reasons why breathing chronically with the mouth is not healthy for us. Now, there are some breathwork exercises that are done through the mouth intentionally, but that's for a specific breathwork exercise. But we want our general breathing to breathe through the nose. So what can we do about that? If we're concerned that we may be a mouth breather at night, some people do mouth taping. They take a piece of tape. You want to get the kind that won't rip your skin off. And you just put a piece from your upper lip or like this. Some people tape their mouths like that, but that's pretty claustrophobic to me. I've tried it. It feels pretty claustrophobic. If you just put over here, it's going to keep your mouth together, encourage you to breathe through the nose. But if you had to, you can still get air, inside. So it won't feel so claustrophobic. But, it's mouth. And that, again, can help us over a while train ourselves, again, to become nose breathers at night. And again, there's a lot of research showing why if we're chronic mouth breathers at night, it's not healthy for us. If we're nose breathers, it is healthy for us on so many different levels. The release of toxins, there's so many different things that breathing through the nose properly is designed to do. And then during the day, we can just pay attention. If we notice we're breathing a lot with the mouth, we can just close the mouth, return to nose breathing. And also if we work out, it's really good for any of us who are doing any kind of aerobic workout to really train ourselves to do so through the nose. Because very often as we start to, get the heart rate up, we're doing like that. And if we can train ourselves just very gently and gradually to be able to get our heart rate up further and further, whether we're walking or jogging or doing any other kind of aerobic workout, or even doing things like push-ups, if we can do it and while keeping the mouth closed and breathing through the nose. Again, there's all kinds of physiological, neurochemical things that are going on there that are good for us that I'm not going to go into here, but anyone can do the research. And again, James Nestor's book is a great place to start. So those are some just simple principles about, shifting from chest breathing to diaphragmatic breathing, lateral breathing as opposed to vertical breathing, slowing our breath down in general, and then being nose breathers instead of becoming chronic mouth breathers. Those are things that can be really impactful for our health overall. And then we can get into, what we might take on if we're interested in beginning a kind of breathwork practice.
Yeah. I love that you just addressed the nose thing, because I just jotted down on my thing. I was like, do we breathe through the nose or the mouth? And you must have read my mind because you went in and answered that question. So do we always, when we're exhaling through the mouth, does it always have to be, no, I guess my question is, should you exhale through your nose or through your mouth always?
There is no always. Okay. There's lots of different types of breathwork exercises. Okay. There's probably thousands, but there's, at the very least, there's hundreds, right?
Yeah.
And many of them come from the pranayama tradition of Vedic yoga from India, as well as other yogic systems from Tibet and the martial arts of Japan and China and so forth, Taoist yoga and so forth. So there's all kinds of breath work that comes from those traditions in Asia. And this work is thousands of years old. Some of it's probably 10,000 years old or older. And then there's various types of breath work that have been developed by scientists and physicians in the West over the last 400 or 500 years. Right. Yeah. So there's all kinds of breath work. There's breath where you do with your mouth open, as if, kind of if you were going to breathe on a mirror and fog up a mirror, you go,
yeah.
Right? So you,
okay.
There's a specific type of breath work that does that. It has a specific physiological purpose, but we're not meant to breathe that way when we're walking around. When we're walking around, we want to be breathing through the nose. When we're sleeping, we want to be breathing through the nose. Okay. For specific breath work exercises, straw breathing is done specifically in through the nose, out through pursed lips. There are other types like, we'll talk about box breathing in just a moment. That can be done simply through the nose. We breathe in, pause, we breathe out, pause, and that can be done all through the nose, or it can be done into the nose, out through just the lip. Doesn't have to be pursed lips. You could just open the lips and breathe out, or it can be done all through. There's different types of breath work. They have different physiological purposes and responses, right? So there's no one right way. It's just important to remember that for our default breathing, our walking around breathing, our sleeping breathing, we want to be breathing through the nose.
Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. So tell us about your book, Radical Responsibility: How to Move Beyond Blame, Fearlessly Live Your Highest Purpose, and Become an Unstoppable Force for Good. How might teachings in radical responsibility contribute to physical care?
Yeah, well, this may seem like a big shifter. What are we talking? We're talking about breath work. Now we're talking about radical responsibility. Well, what radical responsibility is all about, this philosophy that I developed in order to transform my own life and deal with a situation where I found myself in a federal prison serving many, many years on drug charges, that I was able to transform my life and create a life for myself by approaching life in this way. And it's not an age-old, it's not a new idea, it's an age-old idea, but it's one that kind of consolidated in a particular way for me out of my own experience and with the influence of a lot of amazing mentors and teachers and so forth. But it's the idea of embracing 100% ownership for each and every circumstance we face day in and day out, including those that we can see we had something to do with allowing, creating, or, somehow we can see we had some relationship to it. And we see that not for the purpose of self-blame at all. It's really important. The primary distinction in radical responsibility is the distinction between ownership and blame. This has absolutely nothing to do with blaming others, obviously, but it has absolutely nothing to do with blaming ourselves and nothing to do with blaming victims. When we look into, did I have any relationship to this circumstance I'm in that I'm not so happy about, it's purely for the purpose of learning and insight. Because I can see the way I got here and I'm not so happy being here, I went from A to B to C. Well, next time I know I can make a different choice and get a different result, right? So it's purely for the purpose of learning, never for self-blame. And then there's also circumstances that, even getting radically honest, I just can't see I had anything to do with it. It just landed on, fell out of the sky, landed on my head, landed in my lap, and there it is. Well, and it may be very unjust and it may be terrible, and I may need to vent and feel victimized and get a lot of support from people. But ultimately, at some point, the really saying question is going to be, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to let it take me down? Or am I going to find what's the most creative way I can respond to this, which may include getting support and help or even seeking justice? But can I do that in an empowered way where I realize I'm exercising choice, and my choices and my behaviors have consequences for me and impact on others, and I want to own responsibility for all that and try to make choices and have behaviors that create the win-win results for myself and others and the best possible results in life, right? So embracing choice, living a choice. So when you think about self-care, okay, well, a lot of us, we probably, yeah, I know self-care is important, but I don't do it, and we have our whole list of excuses. Now, it's not to say those excuses aren't valid, right? We all live busy lives. And of course, there's some choice in that. We're all trying to live 3 or 4 lives as modern humans, but still, there's a lot of circumstances that kind of make that seemingly unavoidable sometimes. And some of us may be single parents, and just a lot of pressures. And we may even be kind of living at survival, right? And so, the self-care, it's really important to realize self-care is not an either or on-off situation. We can always just bring even a little tiny bit of self-care, or just bringing a little self-empathy to self. Like, wow, I feel like I have no time for self-care. I feel like I'm living in survival. I'm under so much pressure. Okay, this is really hard, isn't it? Yeah, I'm experiencing, this is really challenging, and this is really tough. And I need to kind of be kind to myself here to begin with. The very first thing is I got to acknowledge that this is tough, it's challenging, I'm struggling, and I can be kind to myself. Even that is already emotional self-care. We're going to have a whole day focused on mental emotional self-care. And a lot of that is about self-compassion and just being kind to ourselves, right? So we can all start to make incremental little improvements in self-care. We're more likely to do that if we start embracing choice and realizing that, yes, there's all kinds of circumstances going on in life, and they impact all of us. And other people do stuff that impacts us in negative ways, right? And I mean, the things that are going on in the world, there's wars going on all over the world and refugee crises. Can you imagine suddenly your country is invaded and you're a refugee? What's been going on in Syria? What's going on in the Ukraine right now? I mean, there's terrible circumstances that happen. Within that, we still have choices. Yep. I mean, Viktor Frankl famously wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote it before general neutral language, and it was at one point translated into more languages even than the Bible, and it's transformed millions of lives. It's probably not as well known now because it was written back in the late 40s, early 50s. I actually have somewhere here. There it is. I have an autographed copy of it that
wow.
when I was in prison, a close friend of mine that was involved with our hospice work, and one of the people that came in from the outside to help us with the hospice training, she was a close colleague of Viktor Frankl's, and she got him to sign this book for me, which I treasure. But he ended up in Auschwitz and several other death camps in the Nazi Holocaust because he was a Jewish psychiatrist, medical doctor, psychologist from Vienna, Austria, and his whole family was wiped out. And he was in a work camp, and people around him dying, just dropping dead, right, from starvation and overwork and the elements. And he wanted to survive. And he was also a thinker, reflective person. He wanted to understand why were some people surviving and others weren't. And he discovered two things. He discovered that people that were surviving had a reason to live. They could imagine a future. For some, they just wanted to get out so they could bear witness to the truth of what happened there and just to bring justice or hopefully to prevent it from happening again. And for him, he wanted to get out and continue his life, to complete his academic papers and his books. And he imagined himself presenting at conferences and so forth. And that kept him going. But the other thing he discovered was even in a circumstance where you're in the most powerless situation you can possibly imagine, right? Stripped bare of all human needs, threadbare clothing, in the middle of a Polish winter, bitter cold, starving, and maybe a guard's even got a gun pointed at you, right? That even at that moment, you'll have choice. And he said, what we have choice over then is a choice no one can ever take from us. And that's a choice over the attitude we bring to that situation, And, that's incredibly powerful to recognize that. Now, most of us aren't in that extreme of a circumstance, but a lot of us face very tough circumstances. But within that, there's always choice. And so radical responsibility invites us to always, no matter how much we might be struggling with a circumstance, internal or external circumstance, to remember to ask ourselves this simple, magical question. What can I do? What can I do? The minute I ask myself that question, I'm back in the realm of possibility and solution-based thinking, because there's always a million different ways we can approach any situation, or ways maybe I just need to be more empathic. Maybe I need to be kinder to myself. Maybe I just need to breathe, right? Maybe I need to defend myself. Maybe I need to make better boundaries, maybe whatever. But what can I do? What can I do? And that gets us into the creative mind, the creative mindset, right? So radical responsibility is about staying kind of grounded on our feet, but a little bit on the balls of our feet, leaning into life a little bit, embracing our choices, and operating in that very creative, solution-based, possibility-focused way of, well, what can I do? There's always something I can do here. And so if we bring that spirit to our own self-care, like nobody, self-care is self-care, care for self. Now, you can't expect somebody else to do that, right? We might wish somebody else would do it for us, but I think it's pretty obvious that self-care is up to us, right? Now, we can get buddies to partner with us on self-care. We can join a self-care club. We can go work out in the gym with people. We can build community around self-care, but we still have to do it, right? Mm-hmm. So embracing choice is a great foundational attitudinal quality to then, really take ownership for our own self-care and really to start to think about our lives like, because we're all extending ourselves and giving a lot. Like, where do I start to deplete myself? And when do I need to dial it back a little bit and take better care of myself? And can I learn to take care of myself in action? So even while I'm out there serving in the world and taking care of my family, I can still be doing these little micro practices that are taking care of myself, right?
Yeah. I'm going to have to get that book. I got to get it. All right. So now is the time. You've been talking about, even though you've shown us some lovely examples already, but can you lead us in some simple introductory breathwork practices that we might not have already covered?
Absolutely. So we started with straw breathing right before. So we were breathing in through the nose, then out through pursed lips. And we were breathing in a 4 count, out an 8 count. Now, if it's more comfortable for you, it could be a 3 count, out a 6 count, could be in 5, out 10, in 6, out 12. If you relax and your breath extends, or, the number can be, you can be counting however quickly or how slowly, right? So if you want to, you could be in 4, out 8, but go 1,001, 1,002. You could slow down the 4 count, right? So you can adjust it however you want. The important thing is that the exhale or the out breath is more or less twice as long as the in-breath. Remember, when we breathe out, parasympathetic response. When we breathe in, sympathetic response. So by having more out breath, you're kicking in that parasympathetic breath response. Now, there's other things going on with straw breathing, and you can look it up, use your browser again, and you'll see there's all kinds of things going on with nitrous dioxide and different things of the balance of gases in our breath as we're doing straw breathing. But that's a very simple one. Now we're going to add something to that. Okay. So this next one is called 4-7-8 breathing, which was popularized by Andrew Weil, the holistic physician. It comes from the pranayama traditions of the Vedic yoga systems in India. But let's start with the straw breathing, and then we'll shift into 4-7-8 breathing, okay? So if everybody's ready, we'll begin with an exhale, and then we'll start with an inhale with the counting. So take an exhale, and then begin. In, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So just keep breathing in that way. In through the nose for a 4 count, out through pursed lips for an 8 count. You might close your eyes just so you can better notice any physiological shifts as you're doing that. Breathing in through the nose, out through pursed lips. Breathing in a 4 count at your own pace. Breathing out an 8 count at your own pace. Now, as you're doing that, we're going to add in a third element. We'll breathe in a 4 count, and then we'll pause for a 7 count, and then breathe out for an 8 count. So I'll start us off with the counting in. So everyone, let's exhale a little bit, and then starting in, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's continue in that way. We'll just continue in that way for a minute or so. And just noticing any physiological changes as you breathe in through the nose, out through pursed lips. Breathing in a 4 count, pause for a 7 count, and out for an 8 count. Just continue breathing in that way, the 4-7-8 rhythm. I'm going to explain the next exercise, but we'll just go from one to the other. So just keep breathing with the 4-7-8 breathing for now. That has all the same impact of the straw breathing, but by pausing and holding the breath for a count of 7, you're holding that air and the oxygen deeply in your lungs, and you're getting an oxygen boost, an increased blood oxygen exchange. So in a 4 count, hold or pause for 7 and out for 8. 4-7-8 breathing. Now, in a moment, we're going to add a pause at the end of the out breath. We're going to add a pause at the end of the out breath, which may be a little uncomfortable at first, right? But if you're doing this, it's called box breathing, and usually we do a count of 4 on each part, but you could do a count of 1 on each part. You just find your way into it with comfort, right? So here we're going to breathe in 4, pause 4, out 4, pause 4. That's why it's called box breathing. It's got 4 sides. It's got in, pause, out, pause. And the ideas are all the same. You hear 4 most of the time, but you could do it 5, 6, you could do it 3, you could do it 2. The common people do is 4. But again, 4 could mean different things for different people because you can be counting however fast or slow. Sometimes with the counting, what you may notice that you start to sense your heartbeat, and the counting may line up with your heartbeat. You may just naturally start counting it with your heartbeat, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's practice this one together. Okay. We'll start with an in breath, right? So give a little exhale, and then in, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So keep breathing that way. This is called box breathing. Sometimes it's called 4x4 breathing. Sometimes it's called tactical breathing, because they teach this in the military to high performance units, and Navy SEALs use this to keep themselves calm in the middle of a firefight, if you can imagine, right? So, and to be able to think and make good decisions, right? So this really regulates our whole nervous system. It balances the left and right sides of the brain. There's lots of wonderful things. And you can do your own research with any of these things. You can go into your search engine and look up box breathing or tactical breathing, straw breathing, all of these, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've done straw breathing, 4-7-8 breathing, which is just like straw breathing. You add the 7 in there. Yep. And with the 4-7-8 breathing, you can continue to breathe out through pursed lips. You don't have to. You could just breathe out through the nose, or you could breathe out with the mouth open, but not pursing the lips, whichever you want to do. There's different impacts with every way you do this, and you can do your own research. But I think I do the 4-7-8 breathing out with my lips pursed like that. There's some benefits to that. With the box breathing, you can do the whole thing through the nose, or you can do the out breath through pursed lips. So you can do the out breath just with your lips slightly open. So you can try it different ways. It'll have different physiological impacts. And if you're nerdy like me about this stuff, you can study and do the research and figure out that all these different nuances have little different effects in terms of what they do. But basically, by learning to regulate the breath, we can regulate ourselves out of that chronic stress response and back into the rest and recovery zone. And we need to spend a certain amount of time in the rest and recovery zone on a daily basis for our health and our self-care. Now, sleeping at night, that's our big chunk of being in the rest and recovery zone. And it's so important and that's why it's important to be a nose breather at night and so forth, and to sleep sufficiently and get that good quality sleep, both the deep sleep and the REM sleep, right? Mm. So, breathing properly during the day and breathing more slowly during the day is going to have a lot of positive impacts for us as well. So, but what if, so that's mostly we're too upregulated, right? Most of the time we're too upregulated. But what if we were feeling lethargic, right? Lower energy and lethargic. Can we do something to arouse our energy? Well, we can. We can do some rapid abdominal breathing. So I'm going to model that here. I'm going to put my hand on my belly, right? And breathe with the abdominal muscles through the nose, little short sips. I don't know if you can see my hand vibrating there, but
yep.
Or, if you see me like this, I'm breathing short sips through the nose.
Okay.
That has the exact, in Kundalini Yoga, it's called fire breathing. And that's one you want to be gentle with. Don't be ambitious about it. Don't try to do it for too long. If you do start to feel lightheaded or something, just stop, right? Mm-hmm. And if you want to go further with these practices, then get some good training, get a good teacher, right? And do it in community. But I do this every morning as part of I have a whole routine I do every morning of stretching and different kind of yoga poses and things I do. And the last thing I do, this even before I get out of bed, and the last thing I do is I do a half bridge pose, and I'm doing this fire breathing while I do that. And then I swing my legs over the side of the bed, and I'm really energized and fully awake. And then I engage some more breath work. And there's ways you can get, if you want the ideal balance. One time, a colleague, Richie Bostock, who's a great breathwork teacher, he has this breath, he calls it the bunny rabbit breath, I think, because he says it's like when you do it, it's like your nose is moving like a bunny rabbit, right? So you take 3 sips real quick through the nose, and you fill up the breath completely, and then blow it out. So, right? That'll have the same impact as the fire breathing, right? It's going to upregulate you, right? So you're activating the sympathetic branch. You're going to feel energized. You're going to feel wide awake. So what he suggests is you do that upregulating breath, like the bunny rabbit breath, he calls it, or the fire breathing. You do that a bit till you feel yourself, and then slow it down to some slower breathing, coming back to the elongated out breath. And you'll find that perfect balance of alertness and relaxation, right, for any kind of activity. And so we can really adjust. There's a kind of an ideal physiological state, emotional state, cognitive state for every human activity, right? Yeah. And so the more we practice this, we can learn to regulate ourselves for whatever we're doing, for whatever activity we're doing. We can just check in with ourselves and, okay, fine tune it this way, fine tune it that way, and really get into that flow of life where we're in that appropriately regulated state. Because, any kind of rapid breathing, abdominal breathing, shallow breathing is upregulating. Any kind of breathing where we extend the out breath is going to rest and relaxation breathing, right? Parasympathetic, sympathetic branch response. And, this is so amazing. I teach this a lot to first responders, and they are so amazed because many of them never heard of this before. And many of us have never heard of it before. And that we could actually be in charge of our own nervous system. Because if I don't take ownership for regulating my own physiological state, my own nervous system, guess who is in charge of it? Guess who is regulating it?
Yeah.
Everybody but me.
Yep.
The world around me. In fact, all of us, we live in this interface between our childhood conditioning, which is it's in there, neural pathways, neurobiology programmed into our brain. We had nothing to say about it. We got most of it by the time we were 7, right? A family just kind of brings in, there we go. Good luck, right?
Yep.
And then we live in the interface between that and the world around us. And, if we had really benevolent childhood conditioning and we live in a really benevolent world, then, just being in there kind of mechanically, unconsciously might be okay. But for most of us, it hasn't been that benevolent on either side.
Right.
And so that can be a pretty rough ride if we don't take responsibility for self-regulation and self-leadership. So these are very simple tools that can actually put us back in charge of our own life moment to moment. And to me, that's just incredible.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Fleet, thank you so much for sharing everything that you have with us today. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, they can go to my basic website, fleetmaull.com. That's easy to remember. And you can find out about a lot of the other things I do through that website. If they want to check out Heart Mind Institute, through which we do these summits and a lot of my courses, that's heartmind.co, not com, but just co, heartmind.co. And there you'll see a button, I think it says resources or something like that. And right there, I put that up when the whole pandemic started. There's a bunch of video and audio breathwork right there. Free, anybody can access it. Just go to heartmind.co, and everything we did today is there. Also, if people are interested in the criminal justice, public safety, prison work I do, Prison Mindfulness Institute .org, or prisonmindfulness.org is Prison Mindfulness Institute. Mindfulpublicsafety.org is the work we do with public safety professionals. And on that site, mindfulpublicsafety.org, you will also find a resources section with all these kind of breathwork tools there as well. And we also have an app called CMPS Mindfulness. You can find that on your app store. We really designed it for first responders. But again, we have all these breath regulation tools in there. So you can really just start at fleetmaull.com or heartmind.co. And if people want to learn more about the book, Radical Responsibility, radicalresponsibilitybook.com. From there, you can order it wherever you want, Amazon, indie books, wherever you want. But you can also read about the book there, and you can get a free chapter. You can download a free chapter just going there, radicalresponsibilitybook.com.
Perfect. Fleet, thank you so much for everything today. And thank you for doing this self-care summit. It has been wonderful. And I'm sure everybody is going to enjoy everything they get to see this week. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Melissa. It's been great having this conversation with you. And thank you for being our fabulous co-host, who I think you're doing the lion's share of the interviews. And we really appreciate it. I'm sure it's been a joy for you, because I love doing the interviews and learning from lots of amazing people and learning all kinds of new things. So we're just so excited that you're a big part of our summit this year.
Thank you. It has been such an honor. Thank you so much.
Be well.